Hi there, I'm David Plante. I'm an associate professor of psychiatry at the University of Wisconsin-Madison. Sure, I think the two posters are related. So they're really looking at mostly a compound called elixirexton, which is an orexin-2 receptor agonist that's under development for the treatment of narcolepsy and also other related disorders. So one of the posters really focuses on the primary results of something called the Vibrance-1 trial. So this is a phase 2 study, a randomized controlled trial of elixirexton in type 1 narcolepsy. People who read Psychiatric Times may not know exactly what type 1 narcolepsy is, so it might take a moment to just kind of explain that. So narcolepsy comes in a couple of different types, type 1 and type 2. Type 1 narcolepsy is sort of the quintessential disorder that is caused by loss of orexin-containing neurons in the lateral hypothalamus. And orexin is a really important neuropeptide neurotransmitter that stabilizes transitions between sleep and wake. And when those neurons are lost, that really leads to the downstream symptoms of narcolepsy, which can include pretty severe excessive daytime sleepiness, and also cataplexy, which is a loss of muscle tone in response to emotional stimuli, classically laughter or mirth, as what the textbooks will say. And then also other things like hypnagogic and hypnopompic hallucinations, sleep paralysis, and disrupted nighttime sleep are all sort of classic for the disorder. So for a long time, people have been trying to find medications that could work in this disorder that basically function as agonists at the receptor for orexin. And there's a couple of different orexin receptors, 1 and 2, 2 being the most relevant for sleep. So elixirexton is a potent, highly selective orexin receptor 2 agonist. And the way that it works is it's designed to promote wakefulness in people with narcolepsy. So that's what the main poster was looking at for that study, Vibrance-1. And what it showed was very positive results. So basically, there's a couple of ways that we keep track of daytime sleepiness in these types of clinical trials. One of them is with something called a maintenance of wakefulness test, or MWT. Again, I'm a psychiatrist who does sleep medicine, so this is not something that probably psychiatrists know about, but it's basically an objective test where we put people in a quiet sort of place that normally would induce sleep. They can't move or try, and they're just basically told to try to stay awake. So with no heroic things like singing to yourself or talking to yourself. So it's really hard for people who have disorders like narcolepsy to stay awake. And usually people fall asleep pretty quickly within a matter of just a few minutes. So that was the main outcome of the study. And what it showed is that at all the doses that were tested compared to placebo, there were really substantial improvements on the MWT. So the longer you can stay awake, the better. So the study itself looked at 4, 6, and 8 milligrams of elixirexton dosed once daily in the morning, and it showed really profound improvements on the MWT, sort of over 20 minutes or more for each dose. And to put that in context, again, I know that people may not sort of think about these medications a lot and sort of how they work, but a lot of times when we're studying medications in disorders like narcolepsy to keep people awake, so things like stimulant medications, et cetera, usually they ballpark somewhere between 2 and 10 minutes improvement. So these have a substantially larger effect size than most of the other medications that are out there. So there were big improvements on the MWT, sort of moving it into a normal range that we'd see for people who were otherwise healthy if we did the same testing paradigm. Also, there were really big improvements on subjective measures of sleepiness, something we call the Epworth Sleepiness Scale, which is really commonly used measure of basically people report how likely they are to doze off or fall asleep in different real or imagined situations. So again, really profound improvements on all doses of the compound. And then generally speaking, the medication was quite well tolerated. There were no serious treatment emergent adverse effects. Most of them were mild to moderate in severity. And they seem to be the kind of things that we see in other studies that have looked at orexin agonists as well. So things like insomnia, which tend to resolve with time with the medication. And then also things like polyuria and micturition urgency, which seems to be related to sort of a class effect for these types of medications, which usually, again, is considered pretty mild to moderate for most of the participants in the study. So quite positive results there. One of the other things, though, that was really exciting about that study was some other results that sort of lead into the other poster they had, which was more of a pipeline poster, not necessarily a sort of trying to lay the ground for thinking about how these compounds might affect psychiatry in the future. So one of the other things, or a couple of the other things that elixirexton did that were quite substantial, where they improved subjective ratings of cognition. So participants were given the British Columbia Cognitive Complaints Inventory, the BCCI, which is basically just a self-report measure of, cognitive performance. And what they found was, again, at all doses, really profound improvement with elixirexton. Right? And then another thing that people were given was the PROMIS fatigue severity rating, which is just, again, a subjective rating of fatigue. And again, not surprisingly, orexin at all doses tested really showed prominent improvement. So what's exciting about that is improvement in domains that usually we're not studying in people with narcolepsy. A lot of times we focus on things like daytime sleepiness and cataplexy, but to see improvements in sort of cognitive performance and things like that is really promising. So it opens the door potentially for these types of compounds to really have a lot of effects on the broader sort of psychiatric group of disorders. So anything that might involve impaired cognition, but then other domains like attention may be really important. And because orexin is really important and touches a lot of other parts of the brain, so monoaminergic systems that may be involved in depression and cholinergic systems, there's really a lot of potential for this class of medications that have potential impacts or influences on a number of different disease states. So that's really kind of what the other poster was setting up, sort of saying where else could we go in the future with these types of medications. And I think there's a lot of promise for the field generally. So some of the data that was presented was also some preclinical work that I didn't do, but was done by the company that sort of makes elixirexton, which is Alkermes. And basically, one of the things that they did was like an animal test where and this is with a different orexin agonist, just to be clear. So they're studying a number of these different compounds. And what they did was, I'm not an animal researcher, but basically they took rats and they gave them a paradigm that is basically for ADHD, where they have sort of a chamber with 5 different compartments and then a light. And then the light would come up, and if the light comes up, then the rat goes and gets a reward for going to the light, right? So they're sort of for that response, they get a treat, basically. And so what you can do is you can look at how well the rat does on that task by increasing the speed at which the light comes up. So that's sort of a measure of attention, right? So the rat has to go to the light in the right way. And then also the other thing that you can do is you can slow down the amount of time between the light intervals. And so if a rat is impulsive, they'll just kind of go to one of the places before the light's there. So you can kind of measure these two aspects that we'd see in ADHD, right? So it's an animal model of ADHD. And what they found is that the orexin-2 receptor agonist that they were studying showed improvements on both sort of aspects of the task, right? So in terms of decreasing the impulsivity of going when they didn't need to go, but then also staying on task when they needed to. And it did that whether or not there was sort of an additional kind of standard non-stimulant ADHD medication on board. So it suggests that the compound itself may have a pretty significant impact in that sort of domain. So that's an area, and they're actually starting to study that in sort of what we call early phase 1 trials, so in healthy people and also some people with ADHD. So that's really promising. And then there's lots of other areas where it may be really promising to look at sort of neuropsychiatric or neurodegenerative conditions like multiple sclerosis or Parkinson's disease, where fatigue and excessive daytime sleepiness are also really prominent. So there's a whole host of areas that these compounds may be really useful, and I think sort of bridge between the sleep and psychiatry interface. So for those of us in this space, it's a really exciting time.